nasal discharge, and then we'll say it does affect fertility as well. So animals can potentially abort or produce deformed fetuses as well. So they're all things to keep an eye out for.
Hello, I'm Kieran Lynch and welcome to Teagasc, the Teagasc Sheep podcast. Each episode will bring less insights, advice and technical updates for the sheep industry. Now in Special Time podcast with my colleagues Catherine Egan and Stuart on the Beef and Dairy Edge, we're joined by vet and lecturer at ATU John Donlon to get a better understanding of Bluetongue disease.
Bluetongue is a virus. It's spread by biting midges, and I suppose it's very important to us here in Ireland because it's actually regulated by the EU animal health laws. So I suppose when it gets into the country, there are kind of rules around animal movements and we'll say control of the disease. So it is very important to us.
And which type of animals, John, are most likely to be affected, or how does it typically present in cattle or sheep?
Yeah, so I suppose cattle, sheep are the most associated with the disease. So they're the ones typically with Bluetongue that gets the hardest hit with the virus. But cattle also can be quite affected. Deer, alpacas, llamas, a lot of the cloven foot kind of animals are all affected by it as well. So it affects quite a broad category, but we would typically associate it most with sheep and cattle.
So John, then I suppose how real is the risk?
It's quite a real risk. I suppose we have experience. So because it's we say vector-borne diseases, meaning it's a disease that's spread by a kind of a middle insect, basically. So the insect here being midges, and I'm sure some farmers will have experience with a disease like Schmallenberg. So we've seen Schmallenberg spread across the country over the years that it has been in Ireland. So we can see from that a vector-borne virus can certainly spread across the country, and we're all fairly well aware of midges. So realistically, it can spread quite far and quite quickly, especially we'll say one of the ways that the most likely way that it actually got into the country is probably by a midge being blown across from the UK, which is already infected with Bluetongue. So if we think, if a midge can get blown across the Irish Sea, then there's a strong possibility that it could get blown right down the country or from one farm to the next. So there is a strong risk of it spreading.
And would there be different levels of risk then, depending on what type of farm, would say, from the sheep to the beef finishers to the dairy, like?
Yeah, so sheep would probably be the highest risk farms in terms of they're going to be the farms that have the worst clinical signs. Cattle tend to be, when you talk about Bluetongue, cattle tend to be animals that replicate the virus quite a lot within their systems, so they can kind of hypercharge the virus. So the risk would be greatest with sheep, but certainly my colleagues in Belgium that I've been speaking to about this disease would say even with BTV3, so the strain that we currently have in the north, that can have a significant effect on the health of cattle across. So dairy, sucklers and dry stock can all get affected by it as well.
Yeah, and I actually was in the Netherlands there last month, and they've had a significant impact, and obviously being close to Belgium, they're probably looking at that BTV3 as well, and very seriously sick cows as a result of it. Now, they don't actually die from it, but they are seriously hampered in terms of performance and so forth. And one of the lads will pick up on that in a minute. Just you mentioned there about the wind then, John, so there's a wind coming in off the Atlantic now in the last couple of days again. Is that a positive in one way in terms of maybe potentially blowing it back across to the UK rather than us having it here, or even the northerly wind coming down cold? Is there a time of year when it's more of a risk, or what's the situation with it?
Yeah, so I think you're right. Probably blowing it, the wind coming in from the Atlantic will hold it to one side of the country, you'd hope. But yes, so time of year wise, I suppose we're all fairly familiar with midges pestering us, we'll say, in the springtime into the summertime. So realistically, this was probably a good time of year for the infection to occur, because the midge population that spreads the disease is probably getting less and less active. We'll say you talk about midges being most active between April and November, and the disease, the virus itself actually replicates within the midge. So the midge doesn't just mechanically transmit the virus replicates in the midge, and that occurs around when the temperatures, we'll say, above 12 degrees Celsius. So time of year wise, we're coming to this would be the end of the Bluetongue season typically, if we get a long period or a good strong period of cold temperatures, that'll certainly reduce the spread as well.
John, just to follow from that, in terms of that time of year, the life cycle of the midge that's infected at the moment that has had that impact on the farms in the north, likelihood is that that cycle could end with them, and it's too low a temperature for midge activity, but it's also too low for that virus to replicate.
Yeah, that's correct. And I suppose the hope would be that the infected midge population will die over the winter. There is, there would be a worry that the virus might overwinter in some of those midges, but if we get a particularly cold winter, then that may potentially protect us.
Look, given that the midge is the vector of it, the risk of moving infected animals around, you could potentially infect a whole naive population of midges in another part of the country. I think we've seen that in the UK.
Yeah, so that would be one of my big worries, really, is, we'll say, movement of animals is a potential method by which a completely naive part of the country could get infected. And we'll say, so I would be very conscious of moving animals, but I suppose the Department of Agriculture has its rules in place around if an outbreak of Bluetongue is found in the country. I believe there will probably be a 20-kilometre control zone established, and within that control zone, animal movements of susceptible animals will not be allowed. There would only be movement of animals in very exceptional circumstances, and that would all have to be we'll say flagged with the department and authorised by them. The only exception would be animals moving directly to slaughter.
I suppose, look, we're in winter time. Does housing reduce that risk, or are they just as vulnerable?
It probably does reduce the risk, but it doesn't negate it completely. So, our colleagues in Belgium and the Netherlands, that's one of the things during the summer that they would have done to reduce that risk is they would actually say, house the animals, don't have them out in pasture where they're going to be exposed to the most amount of midges. And then, in mainland Europe, their housing would be slightly different to ours in that they would also have mechanical ventilation in some of the housing, and they'd crank that right up and get the wind speed within the shed high enough that the midges are kind of, even if they get in, they're blown straight out the other side of the shed. There's work done by members of the Pirbright Institute, if I recall correctly, that kind of midge-proofed small barns keep, we'll say, breeding rams out or keep breeding rams safe, and they were able to show, we'll say, if they put midge-proof netting around all of the openings and put brushes on the doors and things, they were able to protect the animals and stop them from being infected. But realistically, the level of kind of containment they were doing in those houses wouldn't be feasible for us to do with, sheds that we're going to be keeping large numbers of cattle and sheep in. Our sheds are too kind of open and airy for us to be able to protect animals fully, but it would reduce the risk.
John, you just mentioned there about trying to protect rams. I suppose we need to be conscious that both rams and bulls could potentially be infected and then subsequently infect their offspring. And look, the risk, I suppose, applies also to semen and embryos.
Yeah, so that is one of the areas we'll say we're very conscious of what you'd call germinal products, so semen and embryos being a potential transmission route. So, importation of semen and embryos from countries that are infected with Bluetongue, the animals that produce those have to go through a certification process where they're kind of sampled on multiple occasions and shown to be Bluetongue negative, both prior to giving the sample and after giving the sample, because that is a potential method of transmission. So, the best advice really is just try and avoid bringing those kind of things into the country. Try and avoid, purchasing semen from areas where that there's a Bluetongue infection, because even with all of the testing, there's the potential that, an animal could become infected and shed it, be missed by a test or something.
On that, what signs should farmers be watching for, given that some of the symptoms can be mild?
Yeah, so I suppose we'll start with your dairy cows. Milk drop is one of the big things that people will catch on. Milk drop is a very generic kind of clinical, the swelling of the lips and the tongue, specifically really in sheep. And that's because the virus itself actually attacks the blood vessels and causes them to basically leak, and the blood, causes edema in the lips and tongue that causes them to swell. So they're the real obvious ones. But then I suppose along with that, you'd have drooling, kind of sores on the face. I'd say if people have seen, I think the Farmer's Journal maybe published a picture from one of the animals in the north, and it had a red muzzle and kind of maybe discharge coming from it. Some of the signs, you may see lesions as well on the claws, the feet and things as well. So, some people, it is one of the things that you need to differentiate from a foot and mouth outbreak basically as well. But drooling, nasal discharge, and then we'll say it does affect fertility as well. So animals can potentially abort or produce deformed fetuses as well. So they're all things to keep an eye out for. And obviously consult your vet if you have a sick animal. But if you're seeing those really classic Bluetongue signs, probably best to call the department as well.
How quickly would you expect some of those signs to appear after infection?
So typically, depending on where you read, they talk about an incubation period of 4 to 8 or 4 to 12 days. So that kind of week to a week and a half, maybe, time period after infection. The only issue with that is animals can be subclinically infected. So we talk about animal subclinical disease being a disease where the animal is actually infected, but it's not necessarily showing very clear clinical signs. And those animals that are subclinically infected can have the virus circulating in their bloodstream, within less than 4 days after they're infected. So a midge could take a blood, feed off of them and potentially already be infected before they're even showing clinical signs.
John, I suppose even if animals don't look sick, can the Bluetongue really affect them? Like you said about fertility there, like, is it a big concern from an Irish context? Because again, going back to my experience from Holland there a month ago, they had impact of it, and what the impact that it's had for them is that their calving intervals have extended. That's seriously important from our perspective because they slip out of our system basically. So what other kind of are there long-term effects of this, or is it kind of individual animals, or is it the whole group of animals, or what way will it work if someone does get an outbreak? It seems to be in finishing cattle there in the north at the moment.
We'll say for your finishing animals and things, if they recover from the disease, there'll still be that period of reduced growth where they're, off form and they're not eating, so they're not going to gain weight for you. So there will be a period of recovery after the initial disease where you're not getting that performance that you want, but that would be nearly more generic we'll say, something you'd
We across
associate with
every disease effectively, like nearly, is
most
it?
diseases effectively. Yeah. More, but as you highlight, fertility would be the area for both suckler and dairy herds that would concern me, particularly because we'll say, when I visited Belgium, I met some veal farm integrators, and Belgium would have a fairly circular system in that they have enough dairy farms to fill all of their veal farms. But in Belgium, the fertility was affected enough that those veal farms were actually buying in animals from the likes of France, Germany, and the Czech Republic to fill up. So they, again, would have seen quite a significant hit on fertility, which for us would be, a major issue for the way we our systems are set up, that we are very good at fertility,
Yeah, and it has even been pointed out that that's been some of the causes, some of the surge in milk there on the back end of the year is because those cows have actually gone in calf, but they've gone in calf later in the dairy system, which is feeding into the price problems that we're seeing on the dairy side now.
Yeah, and that would be a significant issue for us, especially I suppose because our cows are going to be we're going to be trying to get them in calf as the season when midges are really coming into their own.
Yeah. So as John would say, what can the dairy farmers do from my perspective in terms of, as you said, coming into the breeding season? Kieran will be asking from the point of view of the sheep maybe, which and Catherine obviously will be wondering from the beef side of things, how can we prevent that impact in an Irish context?
The main prevention method that's out there for this disease is vaccines. And there are currently a couple of, so BTV3, as I said previously, is the strain that is that has been detected in the north, and I suppose there are currently 3 vaccines that have emergency authorization from the European Medicines Agency for use in outbreak situations. So in the Netherlands and in Belgium and other countries that have had this issue, they have authorised so they have made them available to farmers for use, and in those countries they have undertaken fairly intensive vaccination schedules to control disease, and I think the opinion of the vets over there would be that has worked to a certain extent. So that would be the main thing to do. But because the vaccine is under an emergency license with the EMA, it isn't currently available in Ireland. That is a decision that the Department of Agriculture, so the Minister for Agriculture, will have to make. And then once the Minister has made that decision to make them available for purchase by Irish farmers, I suppose that there will also be a question over whether that is a mandatory vaccination or whether that's voluntary. So in the UK, they have gone with a voluntary vaccination program, and which would be different to the mainland Europe counterparts, and they have maybe not seen as much uptake from their farmers. So there will be decisions that haven't been made yet that will determine a lot of that for us across all of the sectors.
John, is one of the challenges with that unlike other vaccines we use for Clostridial and other diseases, it's not preventative, it is only reducing the symptoms. Do you think that was part of the challenge?
Yes, so that's definitely part of the challenge. It isn't, it won't give you 100% protection. And I suppose the other part of these vaccines that is still under investigation is the duration of protection. Currently, the vaccines that are licensed have no duration of protection quoted for them, and that means that we'll say for trade of animals, if you had a duration of protection and you wanted to trade animals with a country that might be Bluetongue free or something, you can give the vaccine and then certify that animal is vaccinated, and that may allow you to trade depending on some of the rules. currently those vaccines for BTV3 don't have that, and so they don't really improve the situation when it comes to trade of animals.
That is something that might resolve over time. Again, look, it was great that it came out in such a hurry. It was an emergency. But it is likely, John, maybe down the line, that's something they'll be able to focus us with.
And that is, they're very, I think the companies and the regulators are very conscious of that, and I think they're probably working away on it in the background. So that may be different by this time next year.
John, you mentioned there the 20-kilometre movement restriction that might apply if bluetongue was detected. How could a bluetongue outbreak affect selling stock, through marts or exports, given that we're so reliant on exports of beef and lamb?
If we have an outbreak, then the within the 20-kilometre control zone, there won't be any trading out of animals. Outside of that, marts will still be able to operate. And if you're in an area that hasn't got a confirmed, my understanding is if you're in an area that hasn't got a confirmed outbreak, then you will still be able to trade animals at the mart. The issue would be that Ireland would no longer be considered bluetongue free, and so international trade with countries that are not bluetongue free would be limited, and would require certification of those animals' health status. And I suppose the details of that certification will be dependent on the situation when it comes to vaccination and when it comes to the extent of the bluetongue outbreak in Ireland. But I suppose that it may have a significant impact on our ability to trade with certain countries, but that will only really become clear as the outbreak occurs.
As we currently stand, so there's no issue for us in that we haven't a known case in the Republic at the minute, and because it's on the island, doesn't impact the trading status from our perspective. But it is something that people need to be very vigilant for and keep their eyes open and contact the relevant people if they're anyway suspicious, I suppose.
Yes, that's exactly it. Not to be too negative. The Republic of Ireland is still bluetongue free, so that. But I think we just need to be extremely vigilant. So, and as we've said already earlier in the podcast, the outbreak occurred at the end of the vector period, so we have some time to kind of get our house in order and be prepared and ready for next spring, and hopefully there'll be no overwintering of the disease in midges. The only other potential method of overwintering of disease would be infected fetuses. But I'm sure that the Department of Agriculture in the North is very aware of that and has plans in place to monitor that issue.
Bluetongue, is it a food safety issue or
No, there's no food safety concerns. It's not a zoonotic disease, so it's not a disease that can be transmitted from animals to humans. So you can eat products derived from bluetongue infected animals, and it won't have any effect on you, or you can be around bluetongue infected animals and it's not going to have a direct effect on your health. So consumers don't have to worry about that.
And so people can be quite confident in saying that to people, if there is anyone asking any questions of them, they can be quite safe to say that there's no risk.
Yes.
Okay, and then just, I suppose, if you could give one piece of advice to farmers for the season, for the next number of months, what would it be?
I would say keep a very, very close eye on your animals, and if you're in any doubt at all, contact the Department of Agriculture, because I suppose if we catch this outbreak very early, then there's a strong possibility that we can contain it.
Okay, so John, thanks very much for joining us on this week's show. We very much appreciate you taking time out of your day to give us an update and put us in the picture in relation to bluetongue, because it is obviously a concern for all herd owners across the country at the moment.
Thank you very much.
We'll leave it there for this week's episode. I'd like to thank John again for coming on and giving us a good explanation of many of the things we need to consider when we're talking about bluetongue disease. I have included a link in the show notes where you can get more information about it and the relevant contact numbers that John has discussed throughout the podcast. That's it for me. For updates on our sheep programme, keep an eye on our Twitter page at Teagasc Sheep I'm Kieran Lynch. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us wherever you get your podcasts.